Okay, I guess we'll go ahead and get started then. In today's session, I'm going to be taking you through a spouse client file from start to finish, and it's going to be a really open-ended session. So if you have any questions along the way, feel free to either unmute yourself and jump in with your question, or you can send it through the Zoom chat if that's easier. So hopefully everyone can see my screen. This is the screen that you first get to when you log into the system, and it's going to list all the different clients you've added in. To add a new client, you're just going to go up to the add button and then enter in the first name and last name. So we're going to call this client Ben Collins. The email field, this is there if you want to send the client the online questionnaire. So you'd put in their email, you'd click this use questionnaire button, and then when you went to add them to the system, you would get two options. You could either have the questionnaire sent directly from eState Planner, or you could copy a link and send that link from your own email to the client. And that way you can have sort of more customizability on the email. And then once the client receives the email, they click on the link, they're prompted to create a password just so that their information stays secure and so that they don't have to do it all in one sitting. And then they go through it and they can put in their profile, family tree, asset, and debt information. And anything they fill out in that online questionnaire is going to automatically populate back into your system. So it's going to save a lot of time on the manual entry. But you don't have to send the client the questionnaire. So if you have a questionnaire that you currently use, or if maybe you like to collect all of that information in the actual client meeting itself, then just don't worry about putting in the email and you don't have to click this box and it won't send them any sort of questionnaire link. So let's just go ahead and add in Ben Collins. Now today, since we're doing a spouse client file, this means that we have to add both spouses as separate clients to the system because this is going to allow us to create documents for each of them. So we're going to go up to the add button and we're going to add Lauren as the next spouse. So we're going to say Lauren Collins. And then the key thing is when you're adding the second spouse into the system, you're going to want to go to this spouse client field and click on it and select the name of the other spouse that you just added. So you can only do this when you're adding the second spouse because the first spouse needs to already be in the system in order to select their name from the drop-down list. And this spouse linking allows you to sort of it'll automatically copy over the shared family tree information, the joint asset information, so it'll automatically be in both of their profiles. And then if it's going to be a mirror will situation, you also have the opportunity to copy over the scenarios and appointment sections. So that can save a lot of time as well. So we'll go ahead and add. Then you just decide who you're going to start with. So I'm going to pick Ben and just click on their name and it'll take you into their profile. And this is what you start with. So if you haven't sent the client the questionnaire, or if you have, but they haven't filled it out yet, this is what you're going to start with, the client's icon and the spouses. So I'm going to start by editing the client's information. So you just double click on the client's icon, and it's going to have first name, last name, and gender are really the key fields for anyone on the family tree. Also known as for the client, this will populate in the will, so it'll say Ben Collins, also known as Benny Collins. Date of birth, you can type it in, let's say June 8th, 1970, and it'll automatically populate the age for you. Country birth, you can do country, you can do citizenship, and then all of this other information, this is good to have on your client, but it's not going to affect the generation of the will itself. It's more to make sure you've done that adequate investigation. Then the residency portion, this is important because however you set the province as here is how the probate tax is going to be calculated throughout the system, but it's also going to be how the system knows which kind of precedents to generate. So if you're from Ontario, you're going to want to make sure this is Ontario. But if you're from BC, Nova Scotia, or Alberta, you're going to want to make sure you're always changing the province to make sure that it's correct for that client in order for the correct precedents for that province to generate. Then the city, so let's say Ben's from the city of Toronto, it'll say that in the will, this will populate. Then the special circumstances for the client. This is a place where you could note any potential capacity issues. You just check that off and write in a description below to make sure you've got adequate notes and you're protecting yourself from potential litigation. And then you've got relationships. So it's just going to tell you sort of who they're connected to. And right now it's telling us that the only other person we've added in is Lauren, and Lauren is Ben's spouse. And then we'll just go ahead and save. So, and adding anyone to the family tree really works through direct relationships. So, you just click on the icon of the person that you want to add to, and then you go up to the add button and you add the relationship. So, you just have to make sure you click once on the icon and the blue circle will go around them. And then you go up to the add button, you go child, and then it's going to ask you who the other parent is. So you can say if it's the current spouse, if it's a new parent, so an ex-spouse that is going to be involved in the will, or if they're a single parent. So either they're genuinely a single parent or the other parent's not going to be involved in the will, so you don't want to add them into the system. We're going to say it's Lauren. And then you enter in the details. So it's going to be John Collins, male, let's say June 19th, 2000. And then if we scroll down to special circumstances, for anyone that's not the client, this is a place where you can sort of note relationship difficulties or estrangement. But really, the most important thing is this disability function. So, if the individual is disabled, you're going to want to make sure that this box is checked off so that the system can pick up on the fact that this individual is disabled. And that means that later on, when you're creating a trust that's fully discretionary to the death of the beneficiary and it's to this disabled beneficiary, it's going to draft that special Henson trust clause in the will. So you have to make sure that you've remembered to mark them off as disabled on the People tab. And we'll just add in John. So if you're trying to add grandchildren or nieces and nephews, the way it works is through direct relationships. So instead of just adding a grandchild directly to Ben, what you have to do is add a child to Ben, then click on the child's icon and add a child to that child. We're going to say he's a single parent. And that's how you get the grandchild's details in the will. Same kind of thing for nieces and nephews. You would click on the client or the spouse and add a sibling to the client. And then you would click on the siblings icon and you would add a child to the sibling. And that's how you get nieces and nephews in there. If there's going to be anybody else involved in the will in either a beneficiary or a trustee capacity that doesn't fit on the family tree, you can just go over to this All tab. It's going to list everyone on the family tree, and then it's also going to allow you to add in people who don't fit on the family tree, who aren't directly related. So you just go to this Add button, and then let's say Jordy's going to be involved later on, so we'll just put in his information. And then it's going to ask you the relationship. So Ben is connected to Jordy, and his relationship to Jordy is a friend. And then we'll just add that in. So now Jordy's going to appear in our list of people, and this is going to allow us to later on select him as either a beneficiary or a trustee. So that is sort of the People tab. Are there any questions here so far? Nope. Okay, we'll keep going then. The next section is assets. So this is where you're going to list all of the client's assets. You're always going to start with the general personal effects, just to remind you to gift them to someone in the will. So you're triggering a special general personal effects clause. For any other assets, what you can do is you can add all of the client's assets into the system, and you can sort of put values in and really give them a good sense of what they're looking like, what the rough value of their estate is at this point in time. But really, for the will generation purposes itself, the only assets that you need to add in are those that are going to be specific asset bequests or registered assets that you want to confirm or do new designations for in the will. So you have a question, how do I review the questionnaire before sending it to the client? So if you want to have a sense of what the questionnaire looks like, I would recommend sending it, just creating yourself as sort of like a dummy client and sending it to your own email, just as long as you use an email that's different from the one that's associated with your user account. And technically, you can just type in a dummy email and use the copy link function, and then just have us like look at that link, and you can access the questionnaire that way. And that way, you'll be able to go through and see sort of what it looks like before you go and send it to the client. So back to assets, you just go to the add button and then you select your asset type. So these are the different types: financial, miscellaneous, personal effects, real estate. And then within it, you select your actual asset that you're going to add. And really, for any assets that you're adding to the system, the key field is going to be the asset name field, because that's how the asset's going to be identified throughout the system. And it's also going to be how it's identified in the will if you're doing it as a specific asset bequest. So I usually like to put all the information right in the asset name field, so that if I'm adding in multiple bank accounts and they're all called bank account, that's going to be confusing. So this way I know this is the RBC bank account, the other one's the CIB savings account. So I get a better sense of sort of which asset I'm dealing with and planning for at the time. You can also indicate the balance. You don't have to, but if you do, it'll automatically calculate that probate tax for you. And also the visual summaries will look nicer, the graphic summary. Then we'll go and add. Next, let's go for real estate, and we'll say a home. So again, maybe this is the family home, maybe they have multiple homes. Um, Current value, let's say it's $1 million. Also, this address field, if it is going to be a specific asset request in the will, this address field will populate, so you can fill that out. But you also have this mortgage/encumbrances field. So if there's a mortgage on the property, you're going to want to put the value of that mortgage in this field here, because not only is it good to know sort of what asset the debt is associated with, but also it has an effect on how much probate tax is calculated on this asset. So the next section is called debts, and that's where you can put in any debts the client has. But if you're dealing with a mortgage and you're already adding it in and it's associated with one of the assets that you're adding in, I would just put it in this field and not add it as a separate debt on the debts tab. The thing you want to make sure is that you're not adding in both places. So don't put a value here and add it as a separate debt on the debts tab, because it will double count it. So best practice is just add it here in this field and don't put it on the debts tab. Then for ownership, it can be sole, joint, tenants in common. Let's say joint, and then you just click on the add owner and you can pick the other joint owner. And because it's the spouse, if we were to switch over to the spouse's profile, we see this family home is already in her list of assets as well, automatically, because they're linked together. Let's go for one more. We'll go for an RSP. So again, however you identify it is how it's going to be sort of referred to throughout the system. Then you also have this beneficiary field, and this is just for information purposes. So it's just whoever the current beneficiary is on the asset, and it's going to be for the summaries. So later on, we'll actually be able to decide whether we want to confirm or do a new designation in the will. Current value, let's say it's 100,000. So that probate tax always automatically calculates for you, but the income tax doesn't. And this is just due to the variability of different clients' tax brackets. So if you do want to put in an income tax value, what we usually do is try to estimate for the highest possible tax that that asset could incur. So for something like an RSP, we put in like 50% of that. For something like an asset with a capital gain, we would do the 25% of that gain as the value for the income tax. And then we'll just go ahead and add. So that's assets. Then the next section is debts. So this is really more for planning. It's not going to affect the will itself. You just go to the add debt. You select the type of debt. We're not going to put in a mortgage because we already did. And then you just put in the information. Then we're going to get to scenarios. So this is really where all the planning occurs. And at most, there's 3 scenarios that you're going to go through. And the idea is that you go through and create a plan for each one. so that you're covering your bases no matter what happens. So first you create a plan for the situation where the spouse is still alive when the client's passed away. Then you go for the spouse and the client have passed, but there's still kids or grandkids around. And then lastly, it's like your ultimate disaster. Everyone's gone. What's happening? And there's two ways you can go about doing this. You can either go through it manually by clicking into a scenario and going through the different sections. So you would drag and drop over anything that's joint or designated to show that it's falling outside of the estate. For initial gifts, here's where you would drag and drop specific asset requests, or you'd create cash legacies with the cash gift button. And the balance of the estate is how you're dividing up the residue, either by creating segments and gifts within the segments, if it's more of a complicated breakdown, or running a macro, if it's already on one of our list of pre-populated macros. So you can do it that way, or if you're dealing with more of a typical client file, you can go up to this little lightning bolt button in the top corner called EPlans. And these are like giant macros that go through all of these scenarios and appointment sections and create a plan for you according to whatever details of the one you selected. So for example, this one at the bottom, it says in the first scenario, it's going to give everything to the spouse. Then in the second scenario, it'll give everything to the children in this trust. And then lastly, it'll give half to siblings, half to spouses' siblings. So I like the idea of most of this, but I'm going to want to make some changes to the trust and possibly the ultimate disaster scenario as well. I can still run this and save myself some time, and then I'll just go into each scenario after and manually change the details. So I'm going to go execute. And now I can see things have been done here. So it's given the RSP and the family home. It's joint or designated to Lauren, so it's showing that it's falling outside of the estate. Initial gifts, it's given the general personal effects to the spouse because it's going to trigger a special general personal effects clause coming up in the will. And then lastly, for the balance of the estate, we've got all the everything 100% absolute to Lauren. And we don't need to put in a gift over here because that second scenario is the gift over. So we don't need to do anything here. So that's surviving spouse. And then we'll go to descendants only. So nothing that was joint or designated. For the initial gifts, it's given the general personal effects to the children. Let me just show you how you would do it manually if you needed to. You would just click and drag and drop the asset over, and then you either choose people specifically, or you can go to classes and you can choose the class of children instead, and then you just go add. And then it's got the general personal effects going to the children. It's going to generate a special clause in the will. Then for the balance of the estate, anytime you ever want to see the details of the gift, you just click on the gray bar and you click on it again. And so it's telling us the beneficiaries are the class of children, trust for 100%, same trustees as executors. The duration is when the beneficiary reaches age 30, but I'm going to change this to 25. Stage lump sums, I'm going to change this as well. So I'm going to say at 21, I want them to get 25%. Unlimited discretion, gift over first to beneficiaries issue, then if not to the other children. And then we'll save. So now it's updated the details, so it's created the trust that I wanted to create, but I just worked off the E-plan so I didn't have to start from scratch. And then you have this little button in the top corner, and this is the spouse sync button. And what it's going to do is it's going to copy this scenario, everything you've done here, over to Lauren's profile. So it'll copy the residue breakdown, anything that's joint between the two. The only thing it won't copy over are solely owned assets. So sometimes the system sees the general personal effects as each of their own solely owned assets. So Ben has his general personal effects to give away, and then when you're going through Lauren's profile later, you have to give away her general personal effects as well. So that's descendants only. Then you've got no descendants. So nothing in joint or designated, no initial gifts, but we're just dealing with the balance of the estate here. And what it's done is it's given 50% to siblings and 50% to spouses' siblings. But I don't want to do this. I'm just going to clear. I could, maybe if I have a really big family, I don't think it's ever going to get to this scenario. I could just leave it like that and not plan for this scenario. but I am going to create a plan. I'm going to give half to Jordy and half to a charity. So just create a segment. So you can start by saying segment 1, and since I'm making 2 segments, I'm going to do segment 1 for 50%. So now I've sort of created a 50%, but I have to specify what's happening to it. And I do that by adding a gift. So I'm going to pick Jordy as the beneficiary. I'm going to make it absolute 100% of the 50%. So this just means 100% of the 50% segment. So I'm not dividing up this 50% segment any further. And then for the gift over, I'm going to say to beneficiaries issue, and I'll add. So now if I look at the circle, I can see of this 50%, I've given away 100% of it. So I don't want to add any more gifts because I've already dealt with everything here. What I want to do is go to this grayed out segments button and add my next segment to deal with the other 50%. I'll add a gift. This time I'm going to do a charity. So you just go over to this charities tab. And the cool thing is you can search right from the CRA database. So I'm going to search for Epilepsy Toronto. And if I click on the little eye, it's got all the information, the registration number, the website, all of that stuff. And for 100%, and I'll just add that in. So that's a cool new feature. Now you can just search when you do the search for the charity, it's going to search the CRA database for that information for you. So you don't have to worry about messing up the number or anything like that. So that now I've dealt with 100% of this 50% and therefore 100% of everything. And I can sync this over to Lauren as well. That's scenarios. Are there any questions in this section?
A quick question, Michaela. In my scenario, I had only 2 scenarios. It was descendants and no descendants.
Mm-hmm.
And I added a life insurance policy. And I dealt with that in the initial gifts. And so I dragged it over there and put it there and named a beneficiary. And that's basically confirming what is on the policy anyway.
So for life insurance specifically, I would put it in the joint designated assets section.
Oh
instead.
yeah, sorry, that's where I put it. So
Okay.
I put it there,
Mm-hmm.
the life insurance, and I confirmed the beneficiary.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I ran the will, they created the will, it said, do you want to confirm joint asset designation? I checked yes.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would expect to have seen a clause in the will about that particular policy, but I didn't
So
see it.
for life insurance specifically, we don't include life insurance in the will. If you want to confirm the designated beneficiary, you can generate a life insurance declaration document. So
Oh,
that
okay.
way you can give that to the insurance company so you don't have to give them the whole will.
Okay. I see. So yeah, nothing was so I did everything correctly, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, you did. You just need to generate that life insurance document that you
Oh,
just
okay.
go up to this download button and then you click this life insurance declaration and then
Oh,
give
okay.
the confirmation.
Oh, thank you.
No problem.
Could you also run through the scenario where, for example, you're giving a gift, let's say 50%, but you're dividing it between 3 people? Would you initially just select 3 friends right away and allocate 33%?
So it depends on how you want to do it. If you're dividing it up between 3 people, you could either create 3 segments of 33.3%, or you could just create one segment and name the 3 people. So you could just go segment 1 100%, add gift 1 2 3, and then it would just go to all 3 of them.
Thank you.
So you could do that if all the details for the gift are the same, but if you wanted, like if one of them has kids and you wanted a gift over to their kids, if they wanted different gift overs, then I would create 3 separate segments. So it just depends on the details of the gift.
Oh, I understand. Okay. Thank you.
No problem. So that's scenarios. Then you'll go to appointments. So this is where you're going to appoint your estate trustees and your guardians if you need to. So because we ran that E-plan, it's going to make Lauren Collins the primary estate trustee, so the spouse, the primary. For anyone else, you just go to the add button, and And then you pick whoever you want to pick. I'm going to pick Jordy. And then you select your condition. So if you select none, they're going to be a primary. If you put a condition, they're going to be an alternate. So I'm going to pick if all specified cannot act, and I'm going to make sure the name on the specified line is correct. So now it's going Lauren if Lauren can't act Jordy. If I wanted to do a further alternate, I would do the same thing, but I would change the name on the specified line to Jordy's name. So now it's going to be Lauren if Lauren can't act Jordy, if Jordy can't act John. And then the sync button for the spouse is up in the top corner. Then you'll get to provisions. So there's a couple things here. The first is funeral arrangement. So if you want those in the will, you can just type them right on the line. If not, you can delete this text and there won't be any body disposition clause in the will. Include future members. This is if you're using class gifts in the will and you want to include future members of that class in the definition. So you would just check off the box, for example, children, because we use that children class in the second scenario, and it would define the children as John Collins and any other child born to or adopted by me and Lauren. Same kind of thing for class restrictions. You can restrict certain members of being part of a class. Then here's your trust for beneficiaries under certain age. This is your general trust clause that's going to guide underage beneficiaries that you haven't set up specific trusts for. So you can change the age if you want. You can keep it at 25, which is just our default. And then the last thing is secondary will assets. So this is if you're doing multiple wills, you can pick and choose which definitions you want included in the secondary will. So if you're just doing a single will, you don't need to worry about checking or unchecking anything. It won't have an effect. Then up in the top corner, this little exclamation point in the circle, these are our advisor insights. So based on what you put in the system, it's advising you on certain planning things that you may have missed. Like I didn't put in a gender for Lauren. I can go back and change that, and then this advisor insight will disappear. But not all of them will go away. Some of them are more just for your reference, like this, remembering to request prior wills and powers of attorney. So it's just a good resource to go through and check to make sure you haven't missed anything before you go and generate the documents. Beside that, it's just notes. You can make any notes on your client here. And then you get to the generation button. So this is where you generate your documents and your summaries. So first of all, the 3 summaries you can generate. First one's the profile. It's going to give you all the information on everybody in your family tree, all the profile details, all of the asset information, and debts as well. So it's just got all the details. It's good to give to the client after the planning meeting so they can sort of review spelling of names and asset details and make sure that there's no sort of mistakes before you go and draft the final will. Then the graphic summary. This is a nice visual representation of the will for each of the scenarios. And if you're adding in assets with values on the assets tab, this is going to look a lot nicer and it's going to give you a sense of what's going where. Then you've got your text scenario summary. So it's just got all the information on everything you've done, who your estate trustees are, how you've divided up the estate, what initial gifts you've created. It's just like the will without the legalese. It's got all the information. So those are the summaries. Then these are all the different documents you can generate. Today we're going to do a single will. So you just have to check these 2 boxes. Then the signing date. This is if you can change it. You can take it out completely. It depends on what you want to do. You can always manually make that change later on in the document. Registered asset designation. This is if you want to confirm or do new designations for the registered assets in the will. So this is for like RRSPs, TFSAs, that kind of stuff. Everything except for life insurance, because we'll do a separate declaration for that. Joint designated asset confirmation. This is if you want something that says anything that's joint is truly intended to be joint, not held on a resulting trust. So you might want to consider this one if you've got a lot of joint assets with adult children. Counterpart is if you're signing in counterpart under the new legislation. Simplified is a shorter will with less definitions and powers. A will guide is a nice little chart at the end of the will that guides to the different clauses. And then a cover page is just a cover page. And then you can choose witnesses as anyone else on your account, any other users, or you can just select this blank box at the top, and then you can manually put their information in the will later on. And then you just click the generate button at the bottom, and it's going to give you a Word document that's fully editable, so you can make any changes that you want. I'll just go through it quickly. This funds and plans is if you click the registered asset box. This is if you click the joint asset box. Then here's your definitions. My children means John and any other child born to, because we check that children box on the provisions tab. Here's our trustees, Lauren if not Laura, and Jordy if not Jordy, John. Here's our funeral arrangement. Here's a special general personal effects clause that generates because you gift the general personal effects in the initial gift section. And sometimes it'll come up with highlighting because you have to make a decision right now as to whether you want the division of the trustee, the division of the personal effects to be up to the trustee's discretion, or if you want to implement some sort of lottery system, stuff like that. So either you just take out A, B, and C and you keep discretion, or you take out discretion and you keep A, B, and C. So it depends on what you want to do there. This is actually a new feature that we're working on, and soon you're going to be able to make this decision in the system so that you won't have to do it in the actual document. So that's coming soon, hopefully. Then the residue, Lauren, if not Lauren, then this trust for the children, and then ultimately half to Geordie, half to Epilepsy Toronto. And then if you scroll all the way to the bottom, you're going to get to this will guide that's going to guide the clients to the different clauses in the will. So that's how you'd go through it. One other thing I want to point out is this little question mark button. So if you're ever stuck, you can just click on that and it's going to bring you right to our help desk. And it's got lots of articles on how to do different things in the system. It also has courses, and specifically the estate planner certification course. And it's going to give you sort of a nice comprehensive look at how to go through a file using estate planner. So if you're trying to get to know the system better, I would recommend checking out this course. It's free and it's self-paced, and it shouldn't take too much more than an hour. And you can also go to specific sections that you want to know more about. So I would recommend checking this out if you haven't yet. So that about wraps it up for today, but does anyone have any final questions before we go?
Michaela, a quick question on all the notes that you've put into the system. Like we're told to keep notes, by our insurer, like about will instructions, and I'm just wondering, like, where do we? I mean, they're stored on the system, but how do we store them, like,
Yeah,
on
so
our in our
any
file?
notes you make on this little note file, they're
Yeah.
going to appear at the end of the text summary. So when you generate the text summary, it'll appear at the bottom of that. So you can just keep the text, you can save this text summary and it'll have all the notes you've made on the file at the bottom.
Okay. Thanks.
So someone wants to know how to do a scholarship. So I guess there's a couple of different ways you can go about doing it, but if it's like a cash legacy specifically, you would just go into scenarios. You pick the scenario that you want to do it in. You go to initial gifts, then you would create a cash gift. You would go to charities, whatever, or if it was a person, I guess you could select a person as well, depending on how you want to do it. You probably have to get more information there. And then you could either do a trust or you could do an absolute gift, depending on sort of the details of the scholarship. It's more of a specific question there, so you'd have to sort of know the details surrounding it. But I think that it probably would work best as if you're just doing it as a cash legacy for those purposes. Any other questions before we wrap up? Nope. Okay, well, if you do come across anything later on, don't hesitate to reach out. You can either email me directly, you can email support. There's always someone that's going to be around, happy to help. But thanks again for joining me today, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.